I used to think routine was a comfort. My wife, Emily, and I had been married for 8 years, and in many ways, we had settled into a pattern that felt solid, if not thrilling. I worked as a manager for a logistics company, often putting in long hours. Emily had her own graphic design studio downtown, which meant she left the house every morning around the same time I did. Because parking in the city was a nightmare, she started taking a taxi, always the same one, driven by a man named Victor. Victor was a tall, quiet man with a trimmed beard and warm brown eyes. The first time I met him was by chance, on a rare morning I worked from home. I remember thinking he seemed trustworthy. He smiled politely, shook my hand, and called Emily Mrs. Dawes with an old-fashioned deference that made me feel oddly reassured. I watched her climb into the back of his car, her hair bouncing in the morning sun, and never suspected what was growing between them. It started subtly. Emily began coming home a little later than usual, saying Victor's cab was stuck in traffic or he'd needed to stop for gas. Her phone, once left out on the kitchen counter, began living permanently in her purse. She laughed more easily at dinner, but the laughter wasn't for me. Our conversations felt like they were missing a hidden context, like there was an inside joke I wasn't part of. One evening, after a particularly grueling day at work, I called Emily to see if she'd pick up dinner. Her phone rang twice before going to voicemail. 10 minutes later, she texted that she was almost home. When she walked in, her cheeks were flushed, her hair wind-tossed like she'd just run a mile. She blamed the wind and traffic lights for her disheveled look. I tried to brush off the twinge of doubt but failed. Things shifted further the day I found a small receipt from a motel in her coat pocket. It was for a 2-hour stay, dated a Tuesday afternoon when I thought she was working from home. When I asked, she told me it was an old receipt, something that must have slipped in when she borrowed a friend's coat. Her voice was too practiced. Her eyes wouldn't meet mine. But I didn't press her. I wanted to believe. A week later, a colleague invited me to drinks after work, but I decided to head home early. I remember feeling a surge of affection as I turned onto our street, thinking maybe Emily and I could have an impromptu dinner date. That's when I saw Victor's cab parked a few houses down, idling with the headlights off. I pulled over and sat in my car, heart hammering. After several minutes, I saw them, Emily emerging from the back seat, smoothing her skirt, and Victor stepping out to kiss her on the cheek, then her lips. I stayed frozen, gripping the steering wheel. My mind screamed at me to get out, to confront them, to do something. But the betrayal rooted me to the spot. I watched Emily straighten herself and walk toward our house with a lightness I hadn't seen in years. That night, I didn't say anything. I lay next to her in bed, pretending to sleep, listening to the sound of her breathing. It was like lying next to a stranger. Every beat of her heart felt like it was counting down to the inevitable confrontation. The next morning, she left for work without a hint of guilt, kissing me lightly on the forehead. The taxi pulled up on schedule, and I stood by the window, watching her climb into the back seat. This time, she glanced up and caught my eyes through the glass. I couldn't tell if her look was one of shame or defiance, but I knew we had crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed. That day, I called in sick. I spent hours retracing our years together, our first apartment with the leaky faucet we fixed together, the road trips where we sang along to old songs, the nights we held each other through storms. How could it all lead here? When she came home, she found me at the kitchen table, the motel receipt in one hand and a printed list of her text messages with Victor in the other. I'd finally broken into her phone, something I swore I'd never do. Her face paled. She tried to speak, but the words tangled in her throat. "I know, Emily," I said quietly. "I know everything." She sank into the chair opposite me, eyes darting, hands trembling. I expected anger, excuses, maybe even tears. But what came instead was silence, a heavy, suffocating quiet that settled over the room like a fog. And in that silence, I realized the woman I loved was gone, replaced by someone I didn't recognize. Emily didn't speak for what felt like an eternity. She just sat there, staring at the papers in my hands like they were foreign objects. Eventually, she took a deep, ragged breath. "It wasn't supposed to happen," she whispered. "Victor was just someone to talk to." I wanted to laugh, but nothing about this was funny. Talking doesn't happen at motels, I said, my voice low, nearly breaking. Talking doesn't leave lipstick smudges on a taxi driver's shirt. She opened her mouth, then closed it again. The words she finally forced out felt rehearsed. I was lonely. You were always working. Victor listened, he made me feel wanted. Her eyes finally met mine. They were glossy, vulnerable, and I hated that I still felt something for her. I didn't mean to fall for him. Didn't mean to? I said, each syllable sharp. You planned afternoons in motels. You kissed him in your cab, our neighbors probably saw. Don't pretend this was an accident. She started crying then. The tears should have made me feel something, but I was numb. I watched them slide down her cheeks like rain on glass, distant and cold. I stood, the chair legs scraping loudly against the kitchen tiles, and left her sobbing at the table. I needed air. I walked the neighborhood, every familiar sight warped by betrayal. The oak tree we decorated with lights each winter. The sidewalk where we'd walked hand in hand. The memories felt poisoned now. Each step hurt. When I came back inside, Emily was pacing the living room. She rushed to me, hands outstretched, but I stepped back. Don't, I said. She dropped her hands like they were made of lead. I'll do anything, she pleaded. Therapy, quitting work, cutting him off. We can fix this. I wanted to believe that. But every image of them together flashed in my mind. The motel receipt. Her lips on his. The late-night taxi rides where I thought she was safe. There's no fixing this, I said quietly. You chose him every time you climbed into that cab. I spent the next 2 days at a hotel. She texted constantly, promises, apologies, memories she hoped would bring me back. But each message felt like a knife twisting deeper. On the third morning, I decided to return home, not to reconcile, but to end it. When I arrived, the house was spotless. Emily had cooked my favorite meal, the table set like a celebration. She was dressed in the green dress I once told her made her eyes shine. It was like she was trying to rewind time. Please, sit, she said, voice trembling. I did, but it wasn't comfort I felt, it was finality. As we ate in silence, I realized I was saying goodbye with every bite. After dinner, I took a deep breath. I've already spoken to a lawyer, I said. Her fork clattered onto her plate. I'm filing for divorce. I'll move out tomorrow. The house can be yours, I don't care anymore. She looked stunned, like she hadn't actually believed I would go through with it. You can't mean that, she whispered. You love me. I did, I corrected her. But you killed that love. That night, I packed quietly. I found a box with old photos, our wedding day, vacations, nights spent laughing in cheap hotels. I almost let myself cry, but I forced the tears back. Emily hovered by the doorway, eyes red, face pale. She didn't try to touch me this time. When morning came, I loaded my suitcase into the car. Emily stepped outside in her robe, hair tangled. I'll always love you, she called as I closed the door. I hesitated. Goodbye, Emily. I drove away, the rising sun painting the road gold. The taxi wasn't in sight, but I knew Victor was still out there somewhere. It didn't matter anymore. I had miles ahead of me and a future to rebuild. The weeks that followed were a blur of paperwork, moving boxes, and sleepless nights. Friends rallied around me, offering beer and bad jokes that made the emptiness a little more bearable. My parents called every day, reminding me I wasn't alone. I started running again, each mile pounding out a bit of the anger and sorrow. One evening, as I sat on the floor of my new apartment, I realized something: the pain was starting to fade. It wasn't gone, but it had dulled enough that I could breathe without feeling like shards of glass were in my chest. I still had scars, but they were proof I'd survived. Sometimes I'd see a yellow cab in traffic and my heart would stutter. But then I'd exhale, remind myself that the worst was behind me, and keep driving. I'd learned that trust can be shattered in a moment, but resilience is built day by day. The road ahead was uncertain, but it was mine alone now. and I vowed never again to mistake routine for love, or silence for peace. I deserved more, and someday, I'd find it.